What I will talk about is the ideas of photojournalism and documentary photography, and I think the dramatic shifts that are happening and that should happen, but also I don't think we discuss it enough, sort of our own critical take on the profession that we choose to be in. I had a totally different presentation, and then last night I felt, no, I'm going to completely change it. So you're going to have to help me out here, but I think it'll be interesting. I was a jury on the World Press Photo Contest this year, which to me was an exhilarating experience, but also absolutely terrifying. Terrifying because I was frankly quite saddened about the 100,000 images that were submitted, in the fact that there's no voice, there's no authorship, it seems, anymore. And of course I generalize because there was great work that was eventually chosen, but I was terrified because, well, let me play this, of this, a trope. Everybody know what a trope is, or not know what a trope is? No. Well, good. Then we're going to go through and find out. But essentially, a trope is a visual device that can be used not just visually, but also through text, but it's essentially like a musical note that can be repeated, but it also allows, it's sort of like a shorthand code for understanding what the image is trying to say. So I was thinking back to my World Press judging days, and I took a big notebook, and I wish I had brought it with me, but I started taking notes down of all of the different types of stories and pictures that I saw, and we filled it up quite thickly, and these were just sort of some of the tropes that were shared. So, an African child, bloody corpses, dying soldiers, one of the more popular ones, a poverty-stricken mother with her child. So these are some of the images, and I'm not saying these are the images, but I'm just sort of picking out at random some images of what we're talking about. So, African child, bloody corpse, dying soldiers, poverty-stricken mother with her child or children. So those are your sort of very basic ingredients that make up a photograph. So a trope is an easy way to sort through contemporary global reporting among massively growing data images. So basically, as our society grows with images in the way that we all take images, a trope is sort of a signifier that says this picture is about X, Y, or Z. It allows us, as the photographer, a sort of shorthand, or I said earlier, as a code. Maybe I can be a little bit more critical and say slightly lazy way of depicting a situation, a story, developing a context. And I think this is an interesting point too. It's something I'll talk about a little bit later, but there is sort of a philosophy about this growing data that it's actually a good thing for us as photojournalists, as photographers. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And it's something I definitely agree with. And I wanted to talk about, and I think it's interesting with this workshop, they talk about, well, there's problems, but now we also need to discuss solutions. So this first part I want to sort of talk about, for what I see are the basic problems in photojournalism, but then let's look at some situations and examples that can sort of be potential solutions. So after the World Press Photo Contest, I was working with a professor in the Netherlands. I live back in the Netherlands now. I'm teaching at the KABK.
Oh, that's my city.
In The Hague. It's an interesting art school in The Hague. But anyways, we came up with sort of the 4 tropes of photojournalism. The first one is what we call the presence of the body. So, in very basic form, atrocity is signaled as an action on the body, usually in mid or a close-up shot. Dramatic gestures and facial expressions are frequently featured. Make sense? Somewhat. I'm sure we all can sort of devise a picture in our head that sort of illustrates this trope. So, something like that. Recognizability. So an image that is embedded with Western visual and literary culture, i.e. the history of art or the history of journalism, a child at gunpoint, a weeping woman, etc., are all sort of what I mean by recognizability. And especially when I talk about Western visual and literary culture, because when you look at images, all of us are from the West here, and all of us are middle class, educated, have some kind of understanding of our own cultural history. And so we impose upon the image our own cultural expectations, which is normal, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in photography, it sort of makes us, I guess, engage with a picture on different levels than maybe what those pictures actually mean. So in this case, you could say, what does it look like? A Rembrandt. The light, you know? We're associating it with classical Western painting. Affective powers. So in this case, we spark relationships with the audience, fear and shock at carnage, the grief, compassion for victims, or you experience shame. So in this way, this trope is about how do you, as the viewer of the image, interact with it or engage with it. Who wants to take a guess at what could be a great example of this? Or just somebody throw out a picture that you can think of that sort of allows you, the reader, the viewer, to sort of have a recognizable power within that image. Something recent. Merlin? Anything. Think of a picture that might have the recognition powers within you. That might say, I feel great compassion for this subject, or I feel great rage toward this. Maybe that? Then lastly, the idea of symbolic accessibility. And I think this goes for all kinds of journalism where things are reduced to sort of their very bare essences. Good versus evil, war versus peace, the horrors of war, vulnerable women, innocence of children, etc. So perhaps this. We can see the stark contrast between the good versus the evil. We don't need to know what the story is because it's all right there. This was actually done a survey of the World Press Photo Contest over the last, I think it was 12 years, and they went through every single winning image and sort of determined what the most general winning image is. This is it. It's a male corpse on the battlefield amongst ruins. I was going to show a bunch of photos, but I thought we all know what that image is. We don't actually need to see it. But recurring tropes are also predominantly gendered along the traditional conceptions of femininity and masculinity. So there are sort of two ways that the pictures split off. There's sort of a feminine picture, and then there's a masculine picture. And I'll show you some examples of what I really mean by that. And let's use 3 photographs. Again, World Press Photo. I think it's, the reason I'm using World Press Photo is A, I have experience with it. I've worked a lot with them. And I'm not knocking World Press Photo, but I think what's great about World Press Photo is that they actually have a database that you can actually sort of use as the, I don't know what they call that in science, but where they have that, the mean line, basically. So you can sort of go back to that line and sort of use it as a great way to measure. And in our industry, it's the gold standard, right? Everybody would like to win a World Press Photo Award, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to win that. It's a recognition of peers that your work is valued and seen as something. But I thought this was really interesting when I started looking at recent winners. We have Samuel Aranda from 2011, Jody Bieber, 2009, and Pietro Masturzo, 2010, 2009. So these are 3 images, consecutive winning images. So we got 2011, let's take a look, 2010, and 2009. Actually, I should back up. I meant to ask you, what do you see here? Well, I've already given it away, so it's okay. But effectively, those three photographs have all of the four tropes of photojournalism that we just talked about. So, obviously, the presence of the body, there's recognizability in it, it's got the effective powers, and symbolic accessibility within each of those images. And in these three cases, the human body is a signifier of politicized events and the aftermath. On two of them, the bodies are visibly marked by violence. So we just come back up. Obviously marked by violence, politicized violence. Same case here. We don't know what the violence is, but we know that it's sort of been imposed upon the image. This one's a little bit more different, and I like that this one is sort of within the mix because it sort of is it's an outlier, but it still kind of represents how tropes can be used in a alternative voice or an alternative manner. The other interesting thing about tropes, and what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is the idea of traditional gender roles, where women act as caregivers or victims more often than actors challenging existing systems and structures. So in other words, the women are the ones who give care and provide comfort in the image. So what do the men do in images? Anybody want to take a guess?
Go to war.
Go to war, fight, huh? Die? Let's find out. Tim Hetherington, Anthony Swao, 2008, which I found very interesting that these are 5 winning pictures in a row. So what are the men doing? Well, they're usually white, male carriers of authority invested by the state. In other words, they're performing the function of commonly understood masculinity. They're being men. They're raging across the battlefield killing, while the women then cradle the people they killed. And I just took out some images at random to sort of look at these tropes in a slightly different way. This is very much like Samuel Aranda's winning photo, except it's a man comforting his child. Eugene Smith, Minamata. The idea of the cradling, of course, we can also, what else do we see in this image?
It's a classical Pieta.
Exactly, the Pieta, which always seems to come out into play, which I find a fascinating argument. I don't know if anybody is Muslim here, but I would love to know what they think when they talk about Samuel Aranda's photo from Yemen being a classical representation of the Pieta. But to them, it would be a relevant argument. James Nachtwey, again. Slightly different, but still the same tropes and the same tools are used to sort of communicate certain issues within the image.
Sorry, Donald. These were all winning images, like.
Some of them are not.
Okay.
Like I don't know if this one was. I kind of mixed up between World Press Photo and then I thought, well, maybe I can't just pick World Press Photo images. Plus the website's really terrible to find images, I have to say. So. But generally, yeah, these are all World Press winning images, of course. So yeah, going beyond the frame. I just wanted to sort of start that off. This is kind of the language that we as photojournalists are accustomed to. This is sort of inherently built into our nature, I think. And I like the idea of this workshop and the title that it is called Beyond the Frame, because one thing I believe in is looking outside of that frame.